My prison cellmate is an alien girl, but she's actually kinda hot. Rylan barely registers the echoing clang of the cell door before the riot sirens flare to life all around him, flooding the corridor in red strobe light. He's tossed inside, stumbling forward, half expecting a meaty fist to greet his arrival. Instead, he finds himself facing an empty bunk and flickering overhead fluorescents that do nothing to hide the dull grey walls or the oppressive sense of confinement. He straightens, cracks his knuckles, a habit he's never broken, and then notices he's not alone. She sits there on the lower bunk in the same orange jumpsuit he wears, but hers is unzipped low enough to reveal vibrant emerald skin beneath. Her hair is black and impossibly glossy, falling in sleek lines around shoulders that taper into long, lean arms. Everything about her is lithe, even as she reclines like she owns the place. When she lifts her gaze, her eyes flicker with a strange glow that can't possibly be human. He's seen plenty of aliens, but none quite like her, and the subtle point of her ears accentuates a cunning grin that suggests she's been waiting for this moment. The alarms blare, and the walls vibrate with the force of heavy footfalls from the hallway. Rylan takes all of it in with one sweeping look, then returns his focus to her. She hasn't moved from the bunk, but there's a tension in her posture that tells him she's coiled and ready if he tries anything. He's not eager to start a fight with someone who looks like she'd slash his throat the moment he blinked. Instead, he presses his back to the cool metal bars of the cell's frame and tries not to let his gaze linger on her unzipped collar. "You're the new occupant." She doesn't phrase it like a question. Her voice is low, almost purring, and it resonates through him in a way that irritates him as much as it intrigues him. "Yes, sweetheart," he says, voice dripping sarcasm. "And you are?" "Kael'ari," she replies, standing slowly. She's taller than he realized, the top of her head nearly at eye level with him, but there's an otherworldly grace to her movements that makes it feel like she could strike in a heartbeat. The overhead alarm pulses again. How unfortunate for both of us. He rolls his shoulders, scoping out the narrow cell. The place smells of disinfectant and tension, like a tomb with too many restless souls. There's a flicker of movement in the corridor beyond the bars, prisoners running, guards shouting, batons cracking against flesh. It's chaos, and he's stuck here with this alien. Though, to be fair, it could be worse. The alarm's pitch changes, indicating something bigger than a scuffle. Could be a riot, maybe a forced breakout. Whatever it is, the building adrenaline in his system tells him that these are no standard-issue disturbances. He's got to act fast, but he's not sure whether to consider her an enemy or a temporary ally. She saunters closer, bare feet silent. On the cell floor, her eyes scan him, lingering on his scarred knuckles, then the set of his jaw. The corners of her mouth quirk upward, like she finds something about him mildly amusing. He shifts his weight, refusing to step back from her scrutiny. "You're used to fighting, aren't you?" Her tone suggests she already knows the answer. Maybe she hears the subtle shift in his heartbeat or smells his lingering battle-laced adrenaline. "Something like that," he mutters, glancing at the metal bars. "I'm guessing this place isn't in your top 10 vacation spots either." She snorts softly. Humans love their cages. They think they can hold anything if they pour enough concrete and steel around it. Before he can respond, the prison's lights flicker ominously, and a heavy tremor shakes the hallway. Voices ring out, chaotic and urgent. Neither of them moves, but Rylan can see the question in her eyes. Work together or tear each other's throats out. He's got zero love for aliens, but the scuffle outside is sure to draw attention here soon. He doesn't have time to waste on petty prejudices when there's a riot happening. A booming crash from down the corridor prompts them both to glance outside. A hulking figure in an orange jumpsuit stumbles past, brandishing a makeshift shiv. Behind him, a smaller prisoner wields a baton. They clash, slamming each other against the metal railing. It's a free-for-all out there. Rylan braces a hand on the bars, gauging how best to break out. The lock on the cell door looks electronic, meaning the power surge from the riot might have messed it up. He tries the door, rattling it, and though it doesn't slide open, there's a faint hiss as if part of the mechanism is shorting out. He feels her presence behind him before she speaks. If we stay in here, we die. They'll come eventually, either the other prisoners or the guards. Thanks for the obvious, princess. He doesn't glance back. With a single swift motion, he slams his palm against the control panel by the bars. Sparks fly. The door slides halfway, grinds, then gets stuck. He curses and puts his shoulder into it, straining against the half-open door until it wrenches. Open with a squeal of twisting metal. She doesn't bother helping, just watches with a slight smirk that sets his nerves on edge. The hallway is pandemonium. Prisoners in orange jumpsuits swarm left and right, some forming small groups that look more like gangs, armed with scavenged weapons. Guards are pinned behind partial barricades, firing stun rounds that crackle in the stale air. Smoke drifts from overhead lights that have popped under the stress, leaving entire sections of the corridor in flickering shadows. Rylan steps out first, scanning for threats. Kael'ari follows, silent as a cat. Almost immediately, a stocky prisoner lunges at them with a jagged piece of metal. Rylan sidesteps the blow and rams his elbow into the attacker's throat, sending him crashing into the bars. It's quick, efficient. If he had time to think about it, he'd note the way the strike jars his own shoulder, or how the man gasps as he collapses. But the next attacker is already rushing in, and Kael'ari moves before Rylan can react. She's a blur of green skin and black hair. One moment her hand is empty, the next she's snatched the jagged piece of metal from the fallen man and whips it around with a dancer's grace. She slashes across an opponent's shoulder, draws blood, then spins low, sweeping his legs out. The second attacker topples and she drives an elbow into his jaw with a sickening crack. The entire encounter lasts a handful of seconds, leaving Rylan blinking at the efficiency of her movements. She glances at him. "Try to keep up, human." He snorts, ignoring the surge of grudging admiration. The corridor branches in two directions. One leads to the guard stations, the other to deeper cell blocks. He's not sure which route offers a better chance of survival. She tenses beside him like she's picking up vibrations in the air. Then she jerks her chin toward the path leading to the guard stations. "Security hub is that way," she says. "We don't have a chance unless we get control of the gates." He hates that she might be right. His plan was simpler. Keep moving, keep fighting, and find a path out of this god-forsaken place. But the more he thinks about it, the more sense it makes to try for the security hub. It'd have access to cameras, maybe even override codes. He cracks his knuckles again, feeling a dull ache in his old battle scars. "Fine," he mutters. "We move quickly. Don't get in my way." She flashes that predatory smile. "I'm more worried about you being too slow." They sprint down the corridor, slipping past scuffles whenever they can. Their progress is anything but subtle, though. Now and then, a small pack of prisoners tries to block their way, demanding the code to the next sector or threatening them for weapons. Rylan dispatches two with quick, brutal moves to the throat and ribs. Kael'ari finishes the others with that twisted metal shard, moving like lethal poetry. After each encounter, they keep running. The overhead alarm changes tone again. Possibly triggered by the prison's AI, or maybe the guards are fumbling with the system. Bright red lights and thick plumes of smoke fill the far end of the passage, and the smell of burning plastic sets Rylan's teeth on edge. He's spent enough time in combat zones to recognize the stench of meltdown. The entire facility is turning into a war zone. They burst into a wide chamber that might have been a visitor's hall once, but now the tables and chairs are upended as improvised barricades. A group of guards crouches behind these obstacles, firing stun blasts at the encroaching prisoners. Smoke hangs heavy in the air, and flickers of electricity arc from broken fixtures. At the center of it, a massive detainee in a shredded jumpsuit charges straight into the guards' line of fire. He's got arms like tree trunks and a chest riddled with old scars. The guard's stun blasts slam into him, but he barely seems to notice, roaring as he swings a pipe and sends two guards flying. One of them hits the wall with a bone-crunching thud and doesn't get up. Rylan hesitates for half a second, then darts behind a toppled metal table, yanking Kael'ari down. With him, she shoots him an annoyed glare, but he ignores it. He needs a plan. Right now, the guards are pinned, and the big detainee looks unstoppable. Between that brute and the cluster of other prisoners, the place is a slaughterhouse. "You got a plan?" Kael'ari hisses. Her breath is warm against his ear, and her closeness sends a shiver of conflicting emotions through him. He's hyper-aware of her presence, but he focuses on the immediate threat. "Take out the big guy, maybe the rest back off," he says, peeking around the table. The detainee lifts a guard by the collar and slams him against the ground. "We're not making it through this room if he's still standing." She nods, lip curling. "I can distract him." He eyes her. "Distract him how?" She doesn't bother answering. Instead, she springs from their cover, weaving through the debris. Her black hair whips behind her, and her green skin stands out in the haze. The detainee snarls at a guard, but his attention snaps to her the second she moves. Within range, she's agile, sidestepping a punch that would have caved her skull in. She ducks low, slashes at the back of the big man's calf with her makeshift blade. He howls and wheels around, swinging the pipe in a wide arc. She backflips away, an impossibly smooth motion. Rylan realizes it's his cue. He vaults over the overturned table and charges, ignoring the guards and other inmates. Most of them are busy, either scrambling for cover or watching Kael'ari's mesmerizing display. The massive detainee raises his pipe to strike again, but Rylan slams into him from behind, aiming a hard elbow to the spine. It's like hitting a brick wall. The brute barely staggers. He spins, dropping the pipe, and grabs Rylan by the front of the jumpsuit. Instantly, Rylan is lifted off his feet. He seethes, head snapping forward to deliver a savage headbutt that rattles his own skull. The detainee reels backward, loosening his grip enough for Rylan to land a series of rapid punches to the man's throat and jaw. It's not pretty, but it works. Blood sprays from the detainee's busted lip as he stumbles. Kael'ari darts in, slicing across the man's arm with a well-timed slash that forces him to drop Rylan. Rylan rolls away, sees an opening, and drives his knee into the brute's kidney. With a final gasp, the huge man collapses, unconscious or worse. The entire skirmish lasts maybe 10 seconds, but it feels like an hour. In the wake of that confrontation, the guards and other prisoners stare. Some of the prisoners, emboldened by the big man's downfall, lunge at the guards. The guards respond with frantic stun blasts. It's chaos again, and Rylan knows they can't stay here. He steps over the brute's massive body, picks up the dropped pipe. It's a sturdy piece of metal, slightly bent, but serviceable as a weapon. "Time to go," he snaps at Kael'ari. She nods. They slip through the half-destroyed barricade, evading stray blasts. One scorches the floor just behind them, sending sparks and smoke into the air. The heat of it brushes against Rylan's calf. They keep moving. As they exit the visitors' hall, Kael'ari leads him down a side corridor. The noise fades to a dull roar behind them, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant thunder of the alarm. Doors line this hallway, some open, some closed. He glances at a sign on the wall, half-charred. It reads, "Secure Wing." Beneath it is an arrow, pointing left toward administration. "Security hub must be near administration," he says. She doesn't argue, just pivots in that direction. They run in tense silence. He can't stop himself from stealing a glance at her. She's breathing hard, sweat slicking the green skin at her temples, but her eyes are bright, wild with adrenaline. It unsettles him. How alive she looks in this chaos, how she seems to revel in every moment of danger. He's been around soldiers, mercenaries, all sorts, but she moves like she was born to fight in these conditions. He forces his attention forward. They pass a series of small offices, some deserted, others locked. One door stands ajar, and inside is a warden station with flickering screens. Kael'ari pushes the door open wider, pressing a finger to her lips to signal silence. Rylan grips the pipe, stepping in behind her. The station is empty except for the hum of battered monitors showing various angles of the prison. The riot spread is shocking, cells burning, corridors jammed with brawling inmates and unconscious guards. It's clear the facility has lost total control. They're shutting down entire sectors, Kael'ari whispers, pointing at a blinking display. It looks like someone's systematically locking doors and rerouting the security drones. Rylan scans the monitors until he sees one that points to the detention block they just left. The door they came through is now sealed. They got out just in time. His gut twists. There's a purposeful pattern to these lockouts, like someone wants the prisoners herded in specific directions. He glances at her. You think the riot was planned? Feels that way, she replies, stepping closer to the terminal. All these random lockouts. Someone's orchestrating this chaos for a reason. He moves behind her, looking over her shoulder at the screen. She's close enough that he catches a faint scent, something wild and sharp. It makes his pulse jump, but he tamps down the reaction. Focus. She taps at the touchscreen, but it's locked by some higher-level clearance. He tries to override it, but nothing works. It's no use, she mutters. We need a direct console in the main security hub to access the system. Then that's where we go, he says, glancing around for anything that might help. He grabs a half-crushed canister labeled flash grenade from a supply closet. He doesn't know if it still works, but it might be useful. He stuffs it into one of the jumpsuit's pockets. Lead the way, princess. She shoots him a sideways look. I have a name. Sure, Kael'ari, he says. Let's move. They slip back out into the corridor, but it's not empty anymore. 3 guards in riot gear block their path, rifles aimed. For a split second, no one moves. The guards, presumably startled to see 2 prisoners here, shout conflicting orders. On your knees, hands on your head, one yells. Rylan doesn't comply. There's no chance these guys will spare them. In a riot this bad, the guards can't tell friend from foe. They'll shoot at the slightest provocation. He glances at Kael'ari, sees the answering tension in her posture. He acts first, whipping the pipe in a sideways arc. He knows the guard will block it, and that's the point. It draws their attention. While the guard parries, Kael'ari lunges low. She grabs the edge of the guard's riot shield and yanks it forward, causing the man to stagger. The second guard fires his rifle, but the shot goes wide in the cramped space. Rylan bashes the first guard with the pipe, denting the side of the helmet. The guard crumples, leaving the shield to clatter on the floor. The second guard re-aims, but Kael'ari snatches up the shield and slams it into his chest, pinning him against the wall. A stun shot from the third guard nearly clips Rylan instead, scorching the ceiling overhead with a deafening crackle. Rylan hurls the pipe like a spear, hitting the guard's gun arm. The rifle discharges into the floor, sending a shower of sparks that dance around their feet. Kael'ari pivots, using the edge of the shield like a blunt blade, ramming it into the guard's visor. The man collapses. The last guard, pinned by the shield, tries to struggle free. Kael'ari stabs him with the jagged metal piece she's still holding, a quick thrust that draws a groan and a slump of armor. She steps back, chest rising and falling with adrenaline, leaving all 3 unconscious or out of the fight. Rylan looks her over. She's got a speck of blood on her cheek, not hers. She flicks it away with a casual motion and tosses the shield aside, as if it's too bulky for her fluid style. The corridor falls silent except for the crackling overhead lights. They continue onward, each step echoing with tension. Every so often, Rylan scans for more patrols, but the next stretch of hallway is eerily deserted, as if the chaos has drawn most combatants elsewhere. The deeper they go into the administrative block, the quieter it becomes. No more screams, no more weapons fire, just a strange hush that sets his nerves on edge. He motions for her to stay close. She scoffs, but follows. They round a corner and find a set of large, reinforced doors labeled Security Hub. A red light flickers over the lock, indicating some heavy encryption is in place. Rylan narrows his eyes, tries the keypad. Locked. There must be a manual. Override, Kael'ari says quietly, glancing at the small ventilation shafts overhead. Or we can try the vents. Rylan regards the vent. It's not big enough for him, but she might fit. He rubs a scar on his jaw, considering. Worth a shot. I'll hold position here in case trouble shows. She nods, leaps onto a nearby console with feline grace. Rylan boosts her when she grips the vent, and she slides inside with a neat twist of her hips. He's left standing in the corridor, alone and alert. The door behind him leads to an empty office with some scattered files. He paces near the security doors, listening for any sign of danger. Minutes stretch. He hears distant gunfire from somewhere else in the prison. The overhead lights flicker. He cracks his knuckles out of habit, glancing now and then at the sealed doors. Suddenly the lock beeps, and the reinforced doors slide open with a whoosh. On the other side, Kael'ari stands by a console, eyes gleaming with triumph. He steps inside, letting the doors close behind him. The security hub is a large room filled with monitors, control panels, and heavy barricades, presumably designed to withstand riots. Many of the monitors are dead or stuck on static, but a few still show flickering feeds of the chaos outside. She motions him over. I managed to override the door, but the system is heavily encrypted. Looks like someone's locked out most of the normal admin functions. He examines the main console. It's cluttered with error messages. The top message reads, Override engaged. Access restricted. The name of an official, Warden Delmont, glows beneath it. Rylan feels a sour taste in his mouth at the mention of the warden. He remembers the man's sneer when Rylan arrived, how he'd said, You're just another piece of scum. Warden must be pulling the strings, Rylan mutters. He's letting this riot escalate, controlling the flow of prisoners. Why? Kael'ari's lips twist. Maybe he's got a deal with someone, or wants certain prisoners dead or alive. If the chaos wipes them out, fewer trials, fewer loose ends. He scowls, scanning the feed. Then something flickers across. One of the monitors, an older man in a crisp uniform, accompanied by heavily armed guards. The feed labels his location, Central Administration. The timestamp indicates it's live. Rylan clenches his fists. That's him. We find Delmont. We find the manual override. We end this. She arches a brow. And then what? We fly off into the sunset together. There's mocking in her tone, but also a hint of genuine question. He doesn't rise to the bait. I don't care about sunsets. I care about not rotting in a cell because of some twisted scheme. And if taking Delmont down is my ticket out, I'm doing it. She nods, glancing at one of the monitors that shows an exterior shot of the prison yard. 2 gunships hover overhead, floodlights cutting through the smoky gloom. She points. Looks like the cavalry's here. If the warden's in bed with them, they're not here to rescue anyone but him. Or they're here to ensure certain prisoners don't escape, Rylan counters. A wry smile tugs at his lips, which means we need a shuttle of our own. She flicks through camera feeds until she finds a hangar bay on the south side of the prison. That's the main transport. Bay, it's sealed off. If we can open it from administration, we can get to a shuttle. He rests a hand on the console, leaning in. Her shoulder touches his, a brush of heat against his side. He notices the quickness of her breath. Maybe she's still riding the adrenaline high from the last fight, or maybe she's anticipating the next. Her presence is unsettling in a way that's both irritating and alluring. He shrugs off the distraction, focusing on the plan. Then it's decided, he says. We go to administration, take down Delmont, override the hangar doors, and get out, she smirks. And here I thought humans were slow to catch on. He shoots her a glare but doesn't bother snapping back. He heads for the exit. She's right behind him. They step back into the corridor, just in time to see two armed drones zip around the corner. The cylindrical machines hover a few feet off the ground, each bristling with multiple barrels and scanning lasers. Rylan freezes. Drones are no joke. A single burst from one can cut down a room full of unarmored targets. "Duck!" he shouts, diving sideways as the first drone fires. Suppressed gunfire rattles off the metal walls. Kael'ari drops into a roll, coming up behind a pillar. Rylan curses under his breath, flattening himself behind a corner. He can hear the hum of the drone's thrusters as they move to lock on. They must be the warden's last line of defense. He reaches into his pocket, feeling the canister he picked up in the warden's station. Flash grenade. The label's half torn, but it might still function. He glances at Kael'ari across the corridor. She meets his eyes, nods once. He mouths a countdown. 3, 2, 1. Then he yanks the pin and tosses the canister into the open. A brilliant flash floods the hallway, followed by a deafening bang that rattles his eardrums. Seizing the moment, he springs out, pipe raised. The first drone jerks erratically, sensors overloaded. He slams the pipe down on its top plating, sparks flying. He doesn't stop until the machine's thrusters sputter and fail, sending it crashing to the floor. The second drone recovers quicker than he expected, swiveling to aim at him. But Kael'ari is already in motion, leaping onto its chassis from behind, her arm hooking around it. She plunges her jagged blade into a gap in the drone's armor, severing wires. It spins wildly, slamming into the wall before dropping like a stone. In the aftermath, both drones lie smoking on the floor. Rylan leans on the pipe, breathing hard. She stands, hair askew, chest heaving, adrenaline dancing in her eyes. Their gazes lock for a beat, tension still sizzling. They're alive, barely, and something about the near-death encounter drives home how fragile this alliance is. And yet how desperately they need it. She moves first, stepping over the drone's wreckage. He follows, mindful of the possibility of more security measures. But the corridor remains eerily quiet as they continue on. They navigate the labyrinth of hallways, occasionally ducking. Behind corners at the sound of scuffles or blasts in the distance. More than once, Rylan catches sight of bodies sprawled on the floor, both guards and inmates, the orange of their jumpsuits smeared with blood. It's a savage scene. They finally reach a massive set of double doors marked Central Administration. The doors look reinforced with additional plating, possibly the warden's personal fortress within this prison. Kael'ari's lips press into a tight line as she tries the panel. Locked, of course. She glances at him. We could look for another vent. Before she can finish, the doors grind open a few inches, revealing a sliver of the warden's face. Delmont peers out, uniform crisp despite the chaos, a sidearm clutched in his hand. He snaps something to someone inside, then addresses them in the corridor. "Stand down," he calls, voice tense. "I have armed reinforcements. You won't. Get in here alive." Rylan snorts. "Then come out and say that." Delmont scowls, but there's a flicker of surprise when he recognizes Rylan's face. "You, the soldier with the special ops record, should have known you'd survive the riot." Kael'ari shifts beside Rylan, fingers flexing around her makeshift blade. The tension is electric. Rylan imagines the warden has at least a half-dozen guards behind those doors. "Open up!" Rylan snarls. "We know what you're doing, orchestrating this chaos." "You won't get away with it." Delmont laughs, a short barking sound. "Who's going to stop me? By morning, every last violent prisoner will be dead, and I'll spin it as a heroic stand to quell the uprising. The government wants fewer trials and fewer headaches. They won't ask questions." Rylan's grip tightens on the pipe. Kael'ari's eyes narrow, the glow shifting from gold to a sharper green. Delmont continues, confidence radiating off him. You're just scum. In an orange suit, no one cares if you die. The minute we open the gates, loyal troops will swarm in and restore order. If you manage to cling to life, I'll personally put a bullet in your head. The door slams shut, sealing them out again. Rylan exchanges a look with Kael'ari. The warden's plan clarifies everything. He wants to get rid of all the dangerous inmates under the guise of a legitimate crackdown, then walk away a hero. Another wave of bitterness surges in Rylan's chest. It's not like he cares about half the scum in this prison, but he's not letting the warden get away with a mass execution that includes him. They circle around, finding a small side corridor leading to a staff lounge. Inside, there's a hatch labeled Emergency Access. Rylan wrenches it open, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft heading in the general direction of the administration offices. He peers in, the darkness almost complete, then glances at Kael'ari. Guess we go this way. She nods, slipping into the shaft ahead of him. It's cramped, dusty, but at least it's a potential path inside. They crawl for several yards in silence, the only sounds their labored breathing and the distant thrum of alarms. Rylan can't help noticing the delicate lines of her ankles in front of him, the curve of her hips as she moves. He curses himself for getting distracted. Now isn't the time. But the tension between them is like a current, always there, occasionally sparking. They reach a small grate. Through it they can see a control room with a few consoles, manned by a lone guard. No sign of Delmont yet. Kael'ari signals for silence, then carefully pushes the grate. It pops free with only a slight scrape of metal. She waits for the guard to turn away, then drops down noiselessly. Rylan follows, landing behind her. The guard hears them at the last second, spinning around with wide eyes. Kael'ari is on him before he can shout, wrapping an arm around. His neck blade pressed to his throat. He tries to struggle, but she silences him with a well-placed strike. He crumples to the floor, unconscious or close to it. Rylan quickly checks the consoles. They're locked, but an ID badge around the guard's neck might help. He scoops it, up, scanning for a name. Officer M. Blackstone. Kael'ari watches the door, tension in her stance. He slides the badge across the console's reader, and a chime indicates partial access. Camera feeds pop up, showing the warden's private office. Delmont is inside, accompanied by a few heavily armed guards. A large window behind them reveals the yard, where gunships still hover. Rylan notices a control marker for the prison's fail-safes. If they can get to that panel, maybe they can shut down the warden's plan, but the system remains locked. She leans over his shoulder, her breath warm on his ear. Can you override? Not from here. We'd need direct access in his office or the main administrative console next to him. Her lips twitch in a grim smile. Then let's do it the old-fashioned way. He nods, stepping toward the door leading out of the control room. It's locked, but the ID badge opens it. They find themselves in a short corridor. At the far end is a heavily reinforced door with a frosted glass panel reading Warden's Office, the very place they saw on the camera feed. Kael'ari's voice is low. We break in, we fight, we end this. Don't expect them to surrender. He nods, adrenaline thrumming. This is the confrontation they've been driving toward since the riot started. His gaze drifts to her, noticing how her chest rises and falls quickly, how the blood from earlier scuffles streaks her jumpsuit. She's battered, maybe bruised, but there's still that fierce gleam in her eye. For a fleeting moment, something unspoken passes between them, a shared certainty that they might die here. The tension that's been simmering from the start spikes. He steps closer, voice dropping. Before we go in, I want to know, why were you here in the first place? What crime was so severe they locked you up with the worst scum in the system? She studies him for a long moment. I'm an assassin, or was during the war. My people decided I was too dangerous to keep around once the peace treaties were signed. They traded me to human authorities for political favors. She huffs a low, bitter laugh. So much for loyalty. He absorbs that, not entirely surprised. Her deadly grace and callous ease with violence made that obvious. He just never realized it was her own people who handed her over. It doesn't change his plan. He's not squeamish about allies with blood on their hands. He's done plenty himself, but the flicker of betrayal in her voice resonates with his own sense of being wronged by superiors he once trusted. "All right," he says softly. "Guess. We're both here because someone else decided to cut us loose." She nods, and they move toward the door. He swipes the ID badge again. A beep. The door slides open on a scene that's all tense quiet. It's a large office with a heavy desk, a row of monitors behind it, and a wide view of the prison yard. Delmont stands near the window, a pistol on his hip, while two guards heft rifles, scanning the entrance. Another stands off to the side with a baton. The second they see Rylan and Kael'ari, weapons go up. Rylan dives behind the nearest piece of furniture, a thick metal cabinet, just as gunfire rips through the air. Kael'ari dodges to the left, moving in a blur. Delmont shouts, "Kill them!" The glass cracks behind him as stray bullets ricochet. Rylan grips his pipe, sweat trickling down his temple. He hears Kael'ari's blade scrape floor tiles, hears the guards repositioning. He peeks out, sees one guard creeping around his cover. Rylan feints left, swinging the pipe. The guard tries to block with the rifle barrel. Sparks fly as metal collides. Rylan twists his body and slams a kick into the guard's knee. A howl, a stumble. He capitalizes, smashing the pipe into the guard's ribs with a sickening thud. Meanwhile, Kael'ari leaps onto a desk, forcing the second rifleman to track her. She springs off the desk, landing behind him. He spins too slow. She rams her, blade into the back of his vest. He gasps, going rigid. Then she drives the hilt of the blade into the base of his skull, dropping him unconscious. Delmont opens fire. The muzzle flash lights the room in bursts. Kael'ari barely manages to flip behind a couch, one shot grazing her shoulder with a scorch mark. Rylan hurls the pipe at Delmont, who dodges with surprising agility, cursing. The warden reorients his aim, but Rylan tackles the last guard, the one with the baton. They tumble across the floor in a flurry of fists and elbows. The guard lands a blow on Rylan's side, pain flaring in his ribs, but Rylan headbutts him in response. Lights burst behind Rylan's eyes, but it's enough to daze the guard. He seizes the baton, clubs the guard across the temple. Delmont stands alone now, gun pointed at Kael'ari, who crouches behind a shattered couch. The warden glances at Rylan, then at Kael'ari. His eyes burn with desperation and anger. "You think you've won? The place is locked down. My men have orders to kill anyone on sight. You'll never leave." Kael'ari stands slowly, ignoring the trickle of blood where the bullet grazed her. She steps forward with lethal calm, and Rylan sees the warden's hand tremble slightly on the trigger. Kael'ari's voice slices through the tension. "You're done, Delmont. We just need the override codes to open the hangar." Delmont laughs darkly. "Override codes? You won't get them from me." Rylan scoops up the fallen guard's rifle, leveling it at the warden. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Delmont's jaw tightens. "Hard way, then." He fires a shot at Rylan, who dives behind a toppled chair. Kael'ari darts in an arc, forcing Delmont to split his aim. Her speed is uncanny, and the warden's bullet misses, shattering a computer screen instead. She lunges, knocks the gun aside. Delmont tries to elbow her, but she twists, delivering a punishing strike to his wrist. The pistol falls to the floor with a clatter. She catches Delmont's arm, flips him onto his back with a resounding thud that knocks the wind out of him. He gasps, eyes wild with fear. Kael'ari braces a knee on his chest, blade pressed to his throat. "The codes," she demands. Delmont spits in her face. She grimaces, wiping the spit away with the back of her free hand, then raises the blade. "I won't ask twice." Her voice is cold as death, and Rylan knows she means every word. He steps closer, his own rifle trained on the warden's head, in case Delmont tries something. The man's eyes dart from Kael'ari's blade to the muzzle of Rylan's rifle. The entire prison is in flames out there, and he's pinned to the floor. "All right," Delmont rasps at last, the veneer of arrogance cracking. "The override console is behind my desk. Biometric lock. I'm the only one who can open it." Kael'ari's eyes flash. "Then you're going to open it." She hauls him up, blade still pressed to his throat. Rylan keeps the rifle level, as they force Delmont behind the desk. Sure enough, there's a hidden panel. Delmont places his trembling palm on the sensor. The console lights up with a swirl of color. A beep indicates acceptance. Kael'ari glances at the screen, sees lines of code. She taps quickly, scanning. Rylan stands guard, feeling the weight of exhaustion creeping into his muscles. She finds the hangar command. "Here," she murmurs, toggling switches. "Hangar doors. Locked." Then she keys in more commands. "Override engaged." It needs a final confirmation from the warden. Biometrics again. Delmont tries to resist, but Rylan shoves the rifle barrel into his side. He grudgingly lifts his hand. Another beep. The screen's red lettering flips to green. "Doors unlocked," Kael'ari says. She rifles through more submenus, then sets the entire system to open the route to the hangar. Rylan glimpses a network of cell blocks, corridors, and gates popping open. Delmont sputters protests, but no one is listening to him now. Kael'ari steps back, letting out a shaky breath. It feels like they've taken a crucial step toward freedom, but they're not safe yet. Alarms still blare, and the prison yard is no doubt filled with armed gunships. Rylan lifts the rifle again, aiming it at Delmont's head. "Time to finish this." Kael'ari's blade hovers near the warden's throat. "You want to kill him?" Delmont's face pales. He stammers something incoherent, fear shining in his eyes. Rylan meets Kael'ari's gaze. She's an assassin, by trade. He's a soldier with a grudge. Yet a small voice in the back of his head questions if killing Delmont is necessary. But the memory of all the scum in here, herded to slaughter, sparks his rage. The warden was prepared to let them die, in the crossfire for political convenience. "Do it," Rylan says coldly. He expects her to slice the warden's throat without hesitation, but she surprises him. She half smirks, then knocks Delmont out with the hilt of her blade instead. The warden crumples to the floor. He's not worth the effort, and if we ever need leverage, a corpse is useless. Rylan doesn't argue. He stands there, rifle lowering slightly. They've got what they came for. The corridor outside might be crawling with guards, but with the gates open, they can slip through if they move fast. Kael'ari steps over Delmont's unconscious form and jabs the final confirmation on the console. A loud klaxon announces the opening of the main hangar doors. She checks the camera feed once more. "There's one viable shuttle in Bay 2, she says. "We need to hurry before someone else commandeers it." They exit the office, leaving Delmont among his unconscious guards. As they traverse the corridors, they find more pockets of fighting. Some prisoners have formed makeshift alliances. A few guards are still struggling to hold ground. Rylan and Kael'ari push through, ignoring groups unless they block the path. When forced to fight, they do so with brutal efficiency. Blood splatters across the floor. The air is thick with smoke and fear. Eventually, they reach the southern wing where the hangar is located. The massive metal doors are open, revealing a dark, cavernous space with overhead lights sputtering to life now that the override has been activated. The shuttle sits on a raised platform, sleek with the ramp lowered. It's not particularly large, likely a short-range craft for administrative use or emergency evacuations. They break into a run, footsteps echoing. Rylan's side throbs, where the guard struck him with the baton, and Kael'ari's grazed shoulder is bleeding anew, but neither slows. Freed from the locked gates, clusters of inmates also pour into the hangar, some armed, some not. A handful. of security turrets mounted along the upper walls swivel to track movement. If those turrets are active, stepping into the open could be a death sentence. But apparently, the override codes have done something. The turrets remain powered down. A group of prisoners tries to seize the shuttle first, but Kael'ari leaps onto the platform, intercepting them with a terrifying fluidity. Rylan fires, warning shots into the air to scatter them, then clubs down one who refuses to back off. The rest retreat or look for easier targets. The Riot has no shortage of opportunities for violence. Rylan sprints for the shuttle's cockpit, scanning the controls. Kael'ari covers him, brandishing her blade at any who dare approach. He fumbles with the console, cursing. It's locked. With a passkey, but the override from Delmont's console might help. He tries a standard emergency code, and to his relief, the engine hums to life. The shuttle's systems light up, and the ramp begins to close. Kael'ari jumps inside just in time. A few desperate prisoners fling themselves at the rising ramp, clawing for purchase. She stomps on their fingers or shoves them off, her expression unreadable. Rylan doesn't relish leaving them behind to the chaos, but the shuttle can't fit everyone, and they're not here to save the masses. When the ramp seals, a hiss of pressurization follows. Kael'ari staggers into the cockpit, panting. The door closes behind her, giving them a moment of relative calm. She sinks into the co-pilot's seat, pressing a hand to her bleeding shoulder. He spares her a glance, but focuses on the controls, gripping the yoke. The overhead view screen shows the hangar door sliding up. Beyond it, the prison's upper atmosphere glows with the lights of circling gunships. He flicks switches, initiating liftoff. The shuttle rises smoothly, engines whining. Kael'ari grabs the co-pilot's controls, handling the stabilizers. The craft hovers, pivoting toward open sky. An alert beep warns of external hostiles. Two gunships appear on the sensor screen, flanking the hangar exit. They'll shoot if we try to break free, Rylan thinks, heart pounding. Strap in, he growls. Kael'ari tightens her harness. A blast from one of the gunships scorches the edge of the hangar, sending metal shrapnel raining down. Rylan guns. The engines rocketing forward. The shuttle lurches, nearly slamming them into the console. Another shot from the second gunship glances off their shields, making the cockpit lights flicker. Kael'ari curses in her native tongue. Hang on! She adjusts the power distribution, boosting shields. They veer hard to avoid a direct shot, the hull rattling from the near miss. Outside, the night sky spins, the prison looming beneath them. Alarms wail again, warning them of missile lock. Rylan pushes the thrusters to maximum, outmaneuvering the first missile. The second locks on. Kael'ari slams a countermeasure switch, releasing flares that erupt in bright bursts behind them. The missile veers off, exploding in mid-air. The shockwave buffets the shuttle, sending them into a turbulent roll. He wrestles with the controls, jaw clenched. We can't withstand many more hits. Then let's lose them, she snaps back, scanning the console. She finds an atmospheric corridor chart, charting a path around the prison's no-fly zone. Dive to the east, behind that ridge. If we can make it to open space, the gunships won't be able to keep up. He nods, yanking the yoke. The shuttle drops, skimming dangerously close to the rocky terrain. The gunships try to follow, but the narrow canyon-like paths favor a smaller craft. They scrape along the ridge, engines howling, and Kael'ari times another set of flares perfectly, tricking the gunships into firing at phantom targets. Rylan angles the shuttle upward, punching through the haze. The gunships circle below, searching. They're slower to gain altitude in these tight spaces. A final push. The shuttle breaks above the ridge, and the swirling sky envelops them. Stars glitter overhead as they ascend. The gunships shrink behind them, unable to close the distance in time. Rylan exhales, adrenaline surging. Kael'ari checks the sensors, verifying the immediate area is clear. Then she collapses back in, her seat letting out a shaky laugh. "We did it," she breathes, wiping sweat from her brow. For a moment neither speaks. They're out. The prison is a glowing speck behind them now. Rylan sets the autopilot to maintain a safe trajectory. Then he turns to her, noticing the raw tension in her expression, the blood seeping through her. Torn jumpsuit. His own ribs ache, and his body is battered, but they're both alive. "Here," he says quietly, rummaging through a first aid kit in the cockpit. He finds antiseptic and bandages. She slumps forward, letting him dab at the wound on her shoulder. The fabric of the jumpsuit is slick with her blood, and he's oddly gentle, mindful of how it must sting. Her breathing hitches, but not entirely. From the pain, there's something else, an undercurrent of intense awareness between them. They fought side by side, cheated death together, and now they're crammed into a small cockpit in the aftermath of a riot. She watches him with those shifting eyes, the irises flickering from green to gold in the dim console light. He finishes bandaging her shoulder, but his hand lingers longer than it should. Her skin is warm, pulse beating quickly. Something in her gaze dares him to push further. His knuckles brush across her collarbone, the scuffed edges of her jumpsuit parted just enough to glimpse more of that emerald skin. "You're staring," she says, voice low, teasing. The sound thrums through him. He curses inwardly, knowing, damn well this is a bad idea. But the tension has been building for hours, forged in sweat and blood and the near certainty of death. "Not every day I end up in a shuttle with an alien assassin," he mutters, "especially not one who looks like you." She smirks. "You humans, so fixated on appearances." But there's no real bite in her words, just a sort of mocking, seduction. Her gaze drifts to his chest, where the jumpsuit is torn and singed. She runs a fingertip along a scar that cuts across his pectoral. He flinches slightly at the contact, but doesn't pull away. "Battle scar," he explains hoarsely, the memory flickering at the edge of his mind. An ambush on a desert planet, a shrapnel explosion. But he doesn't dwell. Her touch is distracting in a way that sets his nerve endings on fire. He cups. Her face, fingers tangling in that sleek black hair. She doesn't resist, just looks at him through heavy-lidded eyes, daring him. The shuttle hums beneath them. The only other sound, the soft beep of autopilot. He leans in, tension snapping, like a coil finally released. Their lips crash together, not gentle or tender, but urgent, almost angry with how badly they need this release. She tastes of adrenaline and heat, mouth parting to his with a demanding ferocity. He cages her jaw, devouring every gasp, and she responds in kind, fingers digging into his arms. They practically collide, all raw edges and pent-up frustration. Her body presses to his, and he can feel every subtle shift of muscle. That strange, low purring emanates from her throat, sending vibrations straight through his chest. His free hand finds the zipper of her jumpsuit, tugging it farther down. She arches forward, breathing hitching as the cool air meets her skin. He feels the slight quiver in her abdomen when he runs his palm across it, exploring the alien contour of her form. Her hands aren't idle either. She slides them under the torn fabric of his jumpsuit, mapping the scars on his torso. They pull each other closer, feeding on the energy that's been building since that first moment in the cell. Their kisses grow rougher, more desperate, as if they're still in mortal danger and this is the only solace left in the universe. She bites his lower lip, not enough to break skin, but enough to make him hiss and tighten his grip on her. She chuckles softly at his reaction, a predatory amusement that only fans the flames. He props himself against the console, ignoring the sparks of pain in his ribs. She pushes him back, asserting her own dominance, climbing onto his lap. Her hair falls around them like a curtain, shutting out everything but the tangling of limbs and the harsh rasp of breath. His hands roam the curve of her waist, her hips exploring the slick warmth of her alien skin. She slides her palms over his chest, nails scraping lightly, sending jolts of pleasure-laced pain through him. There's nothing gentle about the way they come together. No slow, careful exploration. It's raw, bruising, a continuation of the battles they've been fighting all night. She moves her hips in a demanding rhythm, and he meets her with equal force. They're both on the edge, adrenaline still coursing through their veins, hearts pounding in unison. Each gasp or groan from either of them only feeds the other's hunger. He buries his face in the hollow of her neck, inhaling that wild scent, teeth grazing her skin. She grips his shoulders, a low rumble vibrating in her throat, urging him on. The cockpit feels suffocatingly hot, sweat mixing with the lingering smell of smoke and engine fumes. Every shift of their bodies intensifies the friction, and it feels like they're teetering on the brink of an abyss. They ride that line, pushing each other further, every movement fraught with urgency and half-suppressed violence that bleeds into passion. Finally, the tension snaps, releasing in a heady rush that leaves them both momentarily slack, hearts hammering, muscles trembling. For a second or two, the only sound is their mingled breathing, ragged and unsteady. She slumps against him, her cheek pressed to his shoulder, and he can feel the frantic beat of her heart. Their bodies are still tangled, damp with sweat, but neither rushes to separate. Slowly, she lifts her head, and those shifting eyes lock onto his. He expects some biting remark, a jab at his humanity. Instead, she just studies him with a sort of curious intensity, as if trying to figure out what this means. He exhales, tries to straighten, but a bolt of pain shoots through his side. She notices, sliding off him to ease the pressure on his ribs. He grunts, leaning back against the pilot's chair. The console beeps, indicating a slight course deviation. He flicks a switch, pulling the shuttle back on track. She stands, breathing still uneven, and starts to re-zip her jumpsuit halfway. A small rivulet of sweat trails along her collarbone, disappearing beneath the fabric. He tries not to stare. The afterglow is tangled with the harsh reality of their situation. They're in a stolen shuttle, wounded, with an entire prison riot behind them, and who knows what awaits them ahead. She glances at the star map on the console. "Where do we go now?" He rubs his temples. "Away from here. We can break atmosphere, jump to the nearest outpost. If we're lucky, we can refuel or negotiate safe passage somewhere else." He knows deep down that they're not out of danger. Authorities will be after them, assuming they catch word of the breakout, but one problem at a time. She nods, settling into the co-pilot seat. The cabin is thick with tension, but it's a different kind of tension now, charged, intimate, laced with the knowledge that they're bound by more than just necessity. He punches in coordinates for a major shipping lane. The shuttle engines rumble louder, propelling them higher. Earth, or any other civilized planet, might be a risky destination. They'll have to lie low. He glances over at her, noticing a faint bruise forming on her jaw. His handiwork from when they were, for lack of a better term, locked in that heated struggle. She catches his gaze and smirks, touching the bruise as if it's a badge of honor. They lapse into silence, which stretches for several minutes as they pilot the shuttle out of the planet's atmosphere. The prison is a distant memory now, a flicker of light on the surface. Up here, stars fill the viewport, brilliant and unassuming. The beep of the autopilot resonates in the quiet. Eventually, she leans forward, setting a course for a star system he's never visited. "We can hide in the outskirts of the Nidrax belt. Pirates, scavengers, it's lawless, but they don't ask questions." He nods, checking the readouts. "Fine. As long as they don't shoot us on sight." He exhales, letting the hum of the ship seep into his bones. The immediate danger is over, but 1,000 new threats loom. He turns to her. "I guess this is where we see if we can actually stand each other without a riot forcing us to cooperate." She gives a low, throaty chuckle. "Don't mistake that for an excuse to get comfortable. I'm not what you'd call trustworthy." He smirks, despite the aches in his body. "Neither am I. They share a look that somehow encompasses both the violence and the sudden, undeniable chemistry. She shifts in her seat, momentarily grimacing at her shoulder wound. He reaches over to check the bandage, and she allows it, a small sign of mutual acceptance, if not exactly trust. The adrenaline is fading, leaving behind a stark clarity. He wonders if, once the dust settles, they'll part ways, or if this strange alliance will continue. For now they have a course, a functioning shuttle, and a sense of raw, unspoken connection forged in bloodshed and danger. He focuses on the console, adjusting the trajectory to line up with her proposed route. She watches the swirl of stars, an almost content expression creeping into her features. With one final jolt, the shuttle breaks free of the planet's gravity well, drifting into open space. Ahead, the darkness is speckled with distant galaxies. Behind them, the prison Riot flickers like a candle snuffed by the vacuum of the cosmos. They share a small, knowing nod, as if acknowledging they've crossed a threshold. There's no going back. He flips a switch, engaging the next stage of the engines for faster travel. Her voice breaks the silence, soft but edged with that familiar, confident undertone. We'll find a place to land, patch ourselves up, then figure out who we need to kill next to stay free. His lips twitch in a half-smile. Sounds like a plan. She settles back in her chair, eyes sliding shut for a moment's rest. He glances at her, feeling the mingled exhaustion and satisfaction that only surfaces after surviving certain death. There's no telling what tomorrow will bring, or if they'll even survive long enough to see it. But for this fleeting moment, they're alive, together, and the vacuum of space is theirs to traverse. His hand drifts to hers, almost by accident. She doesn't pull away. Her eyes remain closed, lips curving into the faintest smile. He doesn't. Try to define what that means. It's enough that out here, floating among the stars, they've outrun the nightmares below. Whether the future holds more violence, more passion, or both, they'll face it in the same way they've faced everything else, head-on, unflinching and without apology. He stares at the instrument panel, then at the wide expanse of black beyond the viewport. Her presence at his side is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous alliances spark the fiercest kind of loyalty, one born in the crucible of conflict and sealed with the shared hunger to survive, no matter the cost.